Hello, everybody. This is Free to Play the Third, or more commonly, Free to Play Shroom from uh, Eamon 836. This account's from originally from Eamon something else, but here bringing you an update on where I think you should be in terms of Necro. I've been speaking to some players. There's been some confusion. As always, these classes are really wonky, but this is where I'd start to say you're more of in the middle game, starting to transition towards the later game. So I'm at the 60 million point. I realistically should have full eternal gear. And by the time I finish using my many, many lamps, I will have full eternal gear, hopefully. Um, but I've been a bit busy with my masters and everything else. I apologize. Um, but I've just been trying to make sure I do my dailies, try to keep up with the min-maxing besides for the lamps and PvE, and help out with sailing and parking and everything else, even though I can't do much besides give a debuff or clear a tile. Now, where should you be, in my opinion? You should have awoken a long time ago. So you should have gotten these 6 crystals and done the class awakening. Um, you should have all of your pink souls. Why I don't have all of my pink souls is because I had a yellow or a golden soul as my crit damage bonus soul for the longest time, and I was waiting for me to get one through the acquisition and from the soul um prayer instead of just using a red soul select one. Um, because I don't want to waste points or anything like that from any of the shops. But eventually I pulled it, and since then I should have got the pink soul. I'm pretty sure I'm kind of just waiting on the currency in the ranked match. Because I did the week before get the awakening crystal, like right before I actually got it from the acquisition. But maybe I did it one too many times. I probably forgot that I was supposed to get that this week. But nonetheless, that will be figured out. If you're wondering, around the Master 3 to Master 2, I think is the next area, is the promotion. Does it go down or up? Yeah. So Master 3 and Master 2. I want to say the highest I've gotten is either Master 2 or Master 1, usually running into a lot of cheetahs, chrono loops, a lot of the whales that are on the newer servers and getting blown up. Um, and then sometimes I forget to use my tickets. So I've been trying to use my tickets a little more and trying to dodge and duck and weave my way through the cheetah users, but I'm sure once I get back up to Master 2, and then if I ever got to Master 1, it's just going to be me getting slapped right away until I'm 75, 80, 90 million, let's say. Um, Hopefully by now you have a somewhat decent avian. I'm praying for you. But if you're wondering, in previous videos I've told you, you usually want same boat, altruism, and self-sacrifice because those are going to give the pal crit damage. Alternatively, you can go for more of an attack focus build using low endurance and some of the other ones. Um, if you're wondering, you click the book. And if you were to go to, usually I like to click the legendaries and it shows more of the selection. And sometimes you have to look through multiple pals or multiple avians to find the affect you're looking for. But if you notice low endurance, I think squishy master and yeah, um, low endurance, squishy master, and then if you were to go up to natural burst, that could be a way to full send attack. Um, some people, a lot of people more traditionally would rather focus POW crit using self-sacrifice, same boat and altruism again, like I said before. But I have seen some mages starting to focus full attack, and it is very interesting. Um, I just think you probably want the crit multipliers because unless they're heavily reducing your crit or something like that, it likely is going to result in more end damage output. You also probably should be using a Go-Gurt. I mean, a Go-Gurt, a yogurt at this point, but I haven't gotten a good one. And I also my pal crit, my pal combo haven't gotten to 100% yet. So I haven't always put them in. Um, if you're wondering, some of my pals are a little funky right now. Looks mostly right though. Um, but some of my pals are a little funky because in the earlier renditions of me trying to record this, especially the one right before this, was pointing out the differences in the damage values. So to summarize that, basically just follow along with the damage multipliers listed for the PAL. Don't focus on the rarity because in the beginning, you know, the higher the rarity, the higher the damage. But all of a sudden, you start getting your earlier rarities higher level, and now my purples do more damage. So if I were to compare um this pink deer, not this pink deer, this purple deer or whatever color this is, it has 9.4 damage. And then if I compared it to a red deer, which I would have been using earlier on, it's going to be having 6.63. So you know, probably about 30% or so damage lost. And I'd say it's not really ideal. Comparatively, you're also, when you go for more damage, though, you're losing this damage res, the extra deploy effect. Um, so it is kind of a give and take system. You're not getting every world, you're kind of picking which world you want to go with. But I'd say at this stage, usually you want to hopefully have gotten purples complete and you want to start working on your yellows. Um, just for reference, your yellows and your oranges are pretty much going to be for most mid game to end game tamers, pretty much all of what you use, because eventually your oranges and your yellows are very high level and they do a lot of damage. Um, but hopefully, I'd love to see some people start working into the reds and the pinks. If you have any of these event ones, there's definitely very common picks. For instance, the Moon Spirit Hound against, damage res is usually high in the end game, but especially against the tank, it's really high. So a lot of people like the Moon Spirit Hound. And then also the skeleton minion just came out for the cutesy Halloween event. Happy belated Halloween. Spooky, spooky. But that is I think some people at least have been trying, at least playing with it. I'm interested in it. Uh, I won't get it on this account, but if you want to know about any of the other event pals, just ask me. But yeah, I'd say your yellow and your oranges really start to shine at this point, and for me in particular, the purples are starting to shine. So I'm going to be using purples and yellows, and then at one point yellows and oranges. Hopefully that makes sense. So this pink lizard is gonna bite the dust really soon. He likely should have. I think I only keep him there for whatever I was. Well, actually, let me check why he's even there. Oh, he's there for the PAL crit rate. Yeah, like I said before, my PAL crit rate isn't the best. It's only about 78%. Um, I think my divining is on the wrong thing, so disregard some of the values right now, but you want to be having around 85, 90% plus, at least on like crit, let's say, if not both of them through divining and the Guardian remold. Speaking of Guardian remold, before I forget, because it's hidden with this little arrow, you should have an orange by now. I think this is orange. And then red is really where you want to start working towards. I'd say your tide spirit is likely what you want to work towards, regardless of what you're using, because it's the most versatile. So, or versatile, however you want to say that word. But because it's giving you all these ignores, so the ignore crit, the ignore combo, the ignore counter, gives you more damage res, and it gives you a heal, as well as giving you block and power res. It's pretty substantial. I know a lot of tanks have been liking this. I know a lot of damage dealers have been liking this. So it seems like a good option, especially compared to some of the other options. I love the thought of dealing my defense as damage, but I feel like it's the same thought as basic attack, where it's really not going to do that much damage in practice or realistically even in theory. But we'll see. Maybe I'll be mad enough to try it out on my man. Um, the Zephyr is definitely a little more traditional of your damage tilt because it's just increasing your attack speed, giving you the damage res and more energy regen. But in a really short damage fight, a little faster versus ignoring their combos, their counters, and their crits. I'd say, the Tide Spirit usually takes the cake. Um, and then this Flame Spirit seems interesting, especially because it cannot be cleansed, which is always a good effect to look for. But yeah, I think you should have an orange. If you're a whale, you should have a red. But if you're free to play at this stage, you should have an orange. Um, what else did I show before? Oh, the PvE. So in PvE, I think at this state you should have pretty much all of your dungeons done. Besides the Molten Ruin and the Chrono Tower, you might be, right before finishing on the Lamp Thief. I know this one I had to kind of tinker a little with for Necro, at least at my stage, and because I haven't used all my lamps, I'm sure if you're min-maxing everything, you might have finished this a little before me. Especially if you're switching Archer, which you kind of always should for PvE, but there's some madmen like me that like to do things the hard way. And Chrono Tower is also one that will be a little slower. However, so the Molten Ruins might be a little slow, and the Chrono Tower, it might be a little slow, but you could push this one by kind of just restarting it for the best runes. Trying to get like the invincibility near death one and everything else. Um, this gold thief should be near done, if not done. Ruined. I hope you have a whale that can carry you and that you finished this a long time ago. Same with Snowland Trial. I mean Snowland Crisis. Um, Flame Temple, you should have done a long, long time ago. Dark Trials, I think this is right around the stage you should kind of finish. If not a little before. It might take you a little after just because you really do have to kind of configure each build to try to optimize against them. Like for instance, the Axe Warrior. He has like a 5 second or whatever um shield. So if you put your skills on for no delay, you're going to be wasting your damage into his shield, which you might break his shield, but you might not. Um, and you're also not affecting his HP bar, so you might time out. Whereas if you wait 5 seconds and put your skills on a 5 second delay or whatever, at 5 seconds when his shield goes off, all your skills go off and your damage really starts to turn on, and you're not wasting your skills, quote unquote. Just strategies you kind of have to play with. You might get pre-blitzed by mage. I know I didn't have blitz shield at first, and it took me I was really far behind in Dark Trials because of the Dark Lord. Um, Hopefully a whale to carry you through cloud. And then Sacred Tree. Honestly, I think I'm in the seventh or the eighth thing. Yeah, I'm in the eighth. Um, though I haven't really pushed it as far, so you might be like early in the nines. Um, but I usually just come in here and click sweep. Because of the fact that many of the times I try to push through, I just die either right before it finishes or whatever, and I get a little annoyed, and I'm like, I'll come back to this a week later. Um, so I'd say you should be around 8, 9 on the sacred trees. Um, My skills, if you're at all interested, I don't know if you really care. This might be some mage-based necros, but you should have hopefully maxed out your yellows and be working on the oranges. The oranges are going to take you a while, but maxing out the yellows at level 300 is never a bad idea. Um, and then yeah, I think. I said in the before rendition, I went through some of the different combos you could use for the event gear, but I think I kind of yapped a lot. I think people could rather just ask what they're using and be a little more have it a little more diligently explained to them, especially when they say, "Oh, I have this mixture," and you'd be like, "Oh, you could use this synergy, or you could change this piece out, or oh, you have these pieces, but you're missing that piece, so you can't really do this build, but you could do that build." I feel like it's a little easier to articulate and give a diligent solution or aid to somebody um, when you're working hands on with what they're working with. Now, if you wanted some of the highlights, I guess, chrono loop for a damage dealer, candle for a damage dealer, Hermes staff for a so chrono loop for a damage dealer. Um, where's candle? Candle for a damage dealer, especially against a tank. Same thing with the Mentor Sickle. And then, your tank options are things like your Lantern Scroll or your this really the new Spear of Creation I like. Some people like the book. I've used the book before, it's not bad. Staff Hermes is pretty good. There's a bunch of options. I don't want to yap. Got to record this a couple times now, a couple too many. And I also figure some people probably get a little bored during my yap. So you should probably have the tier seven. That'd be a little higher if you were focusing your gems into your mount, but I really haven't been. So I'm about tier seven. Um, and yeah, I would say if you're gonna be like me and struggle through PvE as a Necro, you should be wise in the Magic Theater and swap to Archer, just because of the fact that Archer in Magic Theater just outperforms even at the really high stages. So if you were to ask some late game tamers, like you have Leroy, you have Farah, you have some others, if you were to ask them, Putty, if you were to talk to them and ask them how they do in PvE, they might tell you that their tamer is comparable, as good, maybe a step down or a step above their archer, especially in certain areas. But in the Magic Theater, it really doesn't seem that's the case. It really seems archer, it's a really archer dominant area of PvE. So I would say for the Magic Theater, if you want to be smart, if you want those weekly rush tokens, swap to Archer, bang it out. You could do something similar with general PvE, which is what a lot of people do, and you probably would have finished most things way earlier than me. But I don't think it's that far behind for a Necro. Like doing this at 50, 60 million, I feel like really isn't a terrible um, pacing for a Necro, especially because as a tamer, you would have had a slight better ability just because you deal more damage. Um, a lot of my sets haven't changed too much, besides exchanging the PAL rarities. So, um, if you want any of those posted, I could post what I've been using, but mainly it's just anti-archer. Though I do have some anti-warrior and some other things, and one for anti-pre-blitz. But if they're using stun, you can't really go against the pre-blitz because if they stun you, it doesn't matter. So. Um, I could help anybody out with those. If you're wondering what you should really be focusing at this stage, and if you're a little bit confused by, or maybe you're hard stuck by people using um, damage immunity gear, and they're using chrono loop and they're using cheetah, and you're like, oh, I can't really be a full damage send anymore. You can go into one of the more hybrid or tank slash regen type builds. And, if you really want to know where you should start to focus on those, first and foremost, always your gear. You want something regen based, usually, um, especially for a regen. But if you're doing, you could do evasion, you could do stun, you could do whatever. So this POW combo regen, this POW crit regen, this stun regen, this evasion regen. And if you ask me on the Discord, I pretty much have already posted guides for all of those and what I use and how I built those. Um, and if you have different event gear, you might want to ask me, hey, I have these different pieces, which would be more optimal? And I could try to help you if you're a bit confused. Um, But we're I think you first, like I said, get it on gear. After gear, you're gonna get it on the artifact runes. So, up to this point, I've just been focusing damage, and that's probably still what I'm gonna be doing. But what I've been doing is trying to get PAL damage, PAL crit damage, I should say, on all of these runes. And on a pink rune with the proper set bonus. Why? Because I'm not the whale of this group. I'm not whatever. So I feel like I could take my time with trying to get the best pieces possible and not waste these potions like you see up here. I probably could instantly get something to level 20 and put it in that piece and that piece. But to me, I'd rather just wait a little bit and not waste either my I guess that's just soul essence shards or soul essence, whatever that is, and the different potions. The restore and the oh my god, the restore and the blocker potions. I thought I could click on it and it would tell me what it is instead of just booting me to a shop, but they really want you to buy that pack. Um, so I would say, pal crit damage is usually what you want as a um, damage based. It's pretty much the most common on a tamer or necro. Um, if you're using not pal crit, pal damage would definitely be the better version. Like if you're a pal combo and you're sending that for damage, though crit is usually really what you want with the combo to get the damage that you want to be viable in PvP at the stage, like the power that you're at and the stage that you're at the most optimal build. So you might beat the lower tier of the arena, but you want to beat as much of the arena and people in your power or whatever it is as you can. Um, and obviously, some builds work better than others. So, if you're a tamer, you might easier beat an archer. As you're an archer, you might easier beat, a mage, etc. But I find that if you're trying to compete, you should usually people have there are some metas that work a little more optimally for what it is. I run defense, so I'll never judge you for running off meta on my main. But on this account, I do run PAL crit damage. I do want to play with PAL damage runes. It's a lot of resources in the early game you got to get, and it takes a long, long time. Um, Now, if you want a more tanky set, I'll tell you the traps right away so people don't fall prey. There's launch and there's healing rate. Now, I won't tell you that these are useless because I'm sure that there's some builds, and I've seen some launch builds that are very good against certain builds, but I would not, in your general set or as your first set of runes, chase launch or healing amount. Regen is infinitely better than healing amount, and then launch I'd say is great against some builds, but is pretty limited. It's basically like stun, but usually there's less ignores, but it's also harder to build and it's lower trigger rate. So you kind of get some pluses with some minuses. Now, I say if you want a full send a wonky build like launch, go for it. But more commonly, people go for skill damage res, POW damage res, combo damage res, counter damage res, and then you have things like building stun. Some people build launch, go for it. But also evasion is very, very common nowadays, especially in the later game, um, which has also made people make ignore evasion builds. But with especially at this point, I'd say a lot of people aren't going to have high ignore evasion, especially not high pal ignore evasion. So evasion definitely is not a terrible idea if you want to start hard focusing it just with any of those things with res, with evasion, regen, stun, especially launch, you really want to hard focus them. If you only kind of half pump them, they're easily counterable and they usually don't work as well. So it's like get the pink artifact runes, know the direction you want, either damage based or regen, evasion, stun, launch, etc. and push it in that area. For me right now, I'm probably going to do my POW crit damage runes. Then I'll do maybe my POW damage runes if I'm still damage based. But if I'm more wonky, I might have my evasion set up to see how viable mid game evasion builds are. I might see how viable a regen is, not on a sage in the mid game without the Dark Lord trials. I'm a bit excited to see now that the game is opened up. I'd say this is definitely a big area. Um, your divining path, depending on how whaley you are, how high you could push in that dungeon, but also, how much you're spending on the dragon bone and other things, you might be way further ahead. In my opinion, you really want to be focusing, your pal crit, your pal combo. Um, This is one of the older presets. I'm working on a couple right now, but I didn't want to get rid of this old one, but it shows it off pretty decently. I have my PAL crits, I have my PAL combo, and in theory, let's say you'd want PAL crit, PAL combo on all of them, and then hopefully you also get lucky with, PAL inspire or what's the other one? Ignores are also really good, but you can get ignore block. Actually, ignore block isn't good. Ignore pal damage res. Sorry, ignore pal res. So it's a little confusing with the wording. There's pal damage res and just pal res, but in here there's pal res, as you see right here. I should just look at the screen. So pal res, uh, if you get ignore pal res, is not a bad one. And ignores. Now, the same thing is true for your remold skills, so I don't necessarily have to show you that on the Guardian, but on, the Guardian, little sneaky thing, they're gonna have these remolds, and if you were to, in theory, you would want ignores and you'd want your own pal crit and your own pal combo, and even some pal ignore evasion is not a bad um, thing. And final damage boost is also a pretty good skill or affect or remold. Yeah, remold skill, which is a wonky terminology. I apologize. Um, I'm trying to think. Did I mention anything else in the other rendition besides this one? I don't think so. I went over some of the Halloween things. I really wouldn't chase this event, at least if you have other options. This mount doesn't have cleanse, so it's not my favorite. I'm sure it has a place and a time, but it's not my favorite because it has no cleanse, so I wouldn't rock it, though it looks really cool. Um, I really like the costume as well. I like the whole theme, if I'm being honest with you. Um, but the artifact, I think there are definitely better options for a damage tilt or a regen based. Maybe I'm completely wrong, and this is the greatest artifact ever. But because of the decaying effect over time, and because of the fact that, this effect only goes off once, to me, it's not as interesting of a option compared to some of the other options that are presentable. Does look really nice though. But yeah, I'm just kind of right now working on these builds, these different hybrids, and hopefully by the next update I'll be able to show you some of the different builds. Where's my gear plan? But going through, and these are a lot, but the different evasion types, the different skill crit pow combo versus crit skill crit. I wanted to kind of map out the different damages, especially as I start building into the eternal and higher things, seeing how different setups kind of compare, and then hopefully having, a free to play counter for everything. Now, I don't expect to have a free to play counter to every single event gear because it's very hard for a free to play, especially at some points, to compete. unless you're using very specific builds and they're always in the same build. And it might be a really bad build compared to everybody else, but fighting that one player it might work really well, or that one player's type of build. So I'm excited to play around with that. Um, if you're wondering, I do use boss damage on the statue still, and you should be at the SSS or the SSS plus by now. Um, but I use the boss damage and then I use global attack. Global pal damage is still kind of a trap at this point. However, note for the assault lamp thief, it seems that only attack works, not your boss damage. So I would just full send attack. I've shown some people some different clips of me hitting with boss damage versus without boss damage, and I tend to do less damage with the boss damage because I'm giving up some of my attack for the boss damage. But yeah, I hope that was a quick, short, and sweet video. Um, Obviously, I'm way behind some of the spenders. Some of them are 120 million by now if they're a real kraken of a whale. But in terms of the season, I can kill towers in like 40 seconds or whatever it is when I put the boss damage and things of that nature. So, you can't really ping pong, but you can kind of ping pong with another slow player, or you can slow pong, I guess you'd call it. But what I usually do is just get the four towers, dip out of there. I think at this point of the game, things really just open up both PvP and PvE. I don't think you necessarily have to be an archer. If you were patient like, me and you stayed Necro the entire time, you start to be able to see, okay, things are starting to work. I'm starting to be able to finish out all these dungeons and everything else. And then in PvP, you start seeing the opening between the damage tilt and the regen tilt, and you kind of just got to know what is the best areas to build it. Again, if you want to do a regen, evasion, a stun, something wonky like that, I would say my later game guide could serve some benefit to you. And then more damage dealing is what I am currently building with this, but many things haven't changed. Um, there's definitely some alternatives. Like you could use panda based or combo based with the cactus, or you could use the pure damage base, which usually works better in the later game, which is kind of what I've been building to kind of set up for that point. And because um yeah, pretty much just setting up for that point. But I hope that this video gave you a good checkpoint or a threshold of where I believe you should be, right around, maybe you're ahead of me, especially if you're a hardman maxer. If you're more of a casual player, you might be behind me. But hopefully, the previous videos up till now have helped with that. And this giving a little check in of where you should be and how the game starts to open up and explaining some of the mechanics of how where you should be looking. Hopefully, that was able to behoove people. I know some people just like to copy paste, but that isn't necessarily how I like to do my builds. I would prefer to give you the background knowledge or whatever knowledge I have surrounding an area, what worked for me, what didn't work for me, the different areas that I would think you could adjust it and see how you build it, and we talk back and forth and work it through. Um, But yeah, I hope this video was enjoyable. I hope everyone had a good Halloween weekend, and I hope this is the last time I have to record this. Thank y'all.